Impulse buying is keeping you broke, and today I'm going to explain exactly how I beat it and what my brain was actually doing the whole time without me realizing it. Here's how it started. I sat down one evening and added up everything I'd bought that month that I hadn't planned for. A few late night purchases off my phone, something at checkout I grabbed without even looking at the price, a subscription I forgot I had, renewing itself quietly in the background like a tiny financial parasite. None of it was dramatic on its own, but stacked together, it was real money. Money that had just evaporated into things I genuinely could not remember buying 2 weeks later. So naturally, I did what any reasonable person does when they discover they've been quietly sabotaging themselves. I declared war on my own brain. 7 days, zero impulse purchases, and I wasn't trying to win this with willpower alone because willpower is famously about as reliable as a Wi-Fi connection on a moving train. I wanted to actually understand what was happening in my head every single time that little voice said, "Buy it, you deserve it." And once I understood it, something interesting happened. The urge didn't get harder to resist. It got almost embarrassingly easy. Um, let's start with the moment everything clicked. The thing nobody tells you about that buy it now feeling. Here's the first thing I learned, and it completely reframed everything else for me. Impulse buying isn't actually about the item. It never was. It's about the 3 seconds right before you buy it. When you see something you want and you hit buy now, your brain releases a small hit of dopamine. And here's the part that surprised me. Dopamine isn't really a pleasure chemical, it's an anticipation chemical. Your brain is rewarding you for the decision to buy, not for owning the thing afterward, which is exactly why so many purchases feel completely underwhelming the second they actually show up at your door. The reward already happened. You just weren't paying attention to when. This explains a phenomenon every single person watching this has experienced. You order something at 11 at night, fully convinced this item is going to change your life. It arrives 4 days later. You open the box with the enthusiasm of someone opening a parking ticket. The thrill is already gone because the thrill was never really about the item. It was about the decision. Behavioral economists have a phrase for this. They call it anticipatory utility, which is a wildly fancy way of describing the exact feeling you get refreshing a tracking number for a candle you didn't need. The legendary investor Charlie Munger once said, "Show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome," and he was talking about business decisions, but it applies disturbingly well to a 2 a.m. Amazon cart too. Your brain's incentive isn't the product, it's the dopamine hit of deciding. And once you see that clearly, you start noticing it everywhere. Which brings us to the second thing I discovered, why the urge shows up when it shows up. Here's where it got a little uncomfortable. My impulse purchases weren't random. They had a pattern, and the pattern wasn't subtle once I actually looked at it. I wasn't tempted on good days, I was tempted on stressful days, boring days, the kind of evenings where I was tired, slightly anxious, and scrolling my phone with the focus of someone defusing a bomb. This makes more sense once you understand what buying something actually does for your brain in that moment. It gives you a small, immediate sense of control during a moment that otherwise feels completely out of your hands. A frustrating day at work, a boring Tuesday with nothing on the calendar. Buying something feels like doing something even when it solves absolutely nothing. It's the financial equivalent of rearranging furniture during an existential crisis. It feels productive. It is not. But it gets worse because once you buy something to cope with a bad mood and the bad mood doesn't actually go away, which spoiler it doesn't because a candle cannot fix your boss, you're left with both the original problem and a credit card statement that's annoyed at you. That isn't even the biggest issue though, because the system around us is engineered to make sure that 11 p.m. impulse never has to wait for daylight to think it over. Which brings us to the part of this story where I started to feel a little bit like a lab rat. The engineered disappearance of friction. Here's something worth sitting with for a second. Buying something today requires almost zero effort. One tap, saved card, no waiting, no friction, nothing standing between the thought, "I want that," and the confirmation email 2 seconds later. That ease is, by design, the entire problem. Your brain doesn't get the chance to slow down and reconsider because nothing in the process is forcing it to. Go back a few decades and buying something meant getting in a car, driving somewhere, standing in a line, physically handing someone cash. All of that built in an accidental pause, and that pause gave your brain just enough time to catch up with your wallet and ask the most underrated question in personal finance. Do I actually want this? That pause has been engineered out of existence, and it wasn't an accident. Companies spend enormous amounts of money studying exactly how to remove friction from the buying process because friction is the only thing standing between your impulse and your bank account. Every buy now button, every saved payment method, every one-click checkout exists specifically to make sure your rational brain never gets a vote. Daniel Kahneman, the psychologist who basically invented modern behavioral economics, described the mind as having two systems. System 1 is fast, automatic, emotional, the part of you that sees a flash sale and feels something shift in your chest. System 2 is slow, deliberate, and rational, the part that would calmly ask whether you actually need a second air fryer. Modern shopping is built almost entirely to keep you locked in System 1 and to never, under any circumstances, let System 2 show up to the meeting. During my 7 days, I rebuilt that pause myself, completely on purpose, which is a sentence that makes me sound far more disciplined than I actually felt at the time. So what does putting the pause back in practice actually look like? It's almost insultingly simple. I deleted saved payment info from the apps I impulse shop on most. I put things in a cart and forced myself to wait 24 hours before buying anything. And here's the part that genuinely surprised me. Most of the time, by the next day, I didn't even remember what was in the cart. The urge wasn't permanent. It was a flash of weather, not a change in climate. It just needed a little time to pass. The comparison machine in your pocket. Here's the fourth thing I noticed, and it might be the most uncomfortable one. A huge portion of my urge to buy things had almost nothing to do with me. It was tied directly to what I was seeing other people post, wear, eat, or travel to. This isn't a new phenomenon. Humans have been comparing themselves to their neighbors since approximately the invention of neighbors, but the scale of it now is genuinely unprecedented. It used to be you compared yourself to the people on your actual street. Now you're comparing yourself to a highlight reel curated from millions of people, edited to look effortless, posted specifically because it generates a reaction. And buying something, it turns out, is one of the fastest ways to quiet that gnawing feeling of being slightly behind everyone else. During my 7 days, I started tracking exactly when the urge to buy something hit, and it wasn't random. It consistently showed up directly after scrolling. Not eventually, not loosely correlated directly after. Close the app, feel the itch, open a shopping tab. It was almost mechanical once I actually paid attention to it. Mark Twain reportedly said that comparison is the death of joy. He never used a smartphone, and yet somehow he predicted the entire business model of modern social media a century early. But that isn't even the most important thing I learned this week, because the real discovery wasn't any single trigger. It was what happened when I strung 7 days of noticing all of them together. Why 7 days actually works? Here's the part that surprised me the most. 7 days is short enough that it doesn't feel impossible to commit to, but long enough to actually start seeing your own patterns in real time, which is something willpower alone almost never gives you the chance to do. By day 3, I started catching the urge before acting on it, mostly because I'd already seen the pattern coming a few times before. By day 5, I could name exactly what was driving it in the moment. Stress, boredom, comparison, or pure scrolling-induced autopilot. By day 7, the urge itself had genuinely gotten quieter, not because I was gritting my teeth and resisting it through sheer force of will, because I finally understood what was actually happening instead of just fighting an invisible enemy blindly. That's the real difference between trying to white-knuckle your way out of impulse buying and actually understanding the psychology underneath it. Willpower is a depleting resource. It runs out by Wednesday afternoon, usually right around the same time you're tired, hungry, and scrolling. Understanding doesn't run out. Once you see the pattern, you can't really unsee it. The investor John Bogle, who built an entire philosophy around eliminating unnecessary costs from people's financial lives, once said that in investing, you get what you don't pay for. I'd argue the same principle applies here in a slightly different shape. In your spending life, you keep what you don't impulsively give away. So here's where I land on all of this, and I want to be honest rather than tidy about it. I'm not going to tell you that I never feel the urge to impulse buy anymore, because that would be a lie, and also because I genuinely still want that air fryer. What I will tell you is that understanding why the urge shows up made it dramatically easier to catch in the moment than blindly resisting it ever did. The urge stopped feeling like a personal failure and started feeling like a predictable pattern with an obvious trigger, which is a much easier thing to manage than a vague character flaw. If you want to try your own version of this, don't aim for forever. Forever is too big and too vague to actually stick to. Aim for 7 days. Notice when the urge hits. Notice what you're actually feeling right before it happens. Notice whether you want the item or just the feeling of deciding to buy something. That noticing is what quietly breaks the pattern, far more effectively than any amount of forced restraint ever could. I didn't expect a 1-week experiment to change how I think about spending this much, but it did. And I think most people would be genuinely surprised by what they'd find if they actually looked. So here's my question for you. What triggers your impulse buying? Stress, boredom, scrolling, or something else entirely? Drop it in the comments. I have a feeling a lot of people are about to recognize themselves in someone else's answer.